Hi, I'm Joe Roth. At New Jersey Sharing Network, we're committed to saving and enhancing people's lives through organ and tissue donation and informing people about our life-saving mission. That's why we're proud to support programming produced by the CAUCUS Educational Corporation and their partners in public television.
Friends of India, next on CAUCUS New Jersey.
Funding for this edition of CAUCUS New Jersey has been provided by Suez, ready for the resource revolution. Sovereign Health System, a fully integrated multi-specialty community healthcare system. MagnaCare, New Jersey Sharing Network, dedicated to saving lives through organ and tissue donation. The New Jersey Chamber of Commerce, the statewide voice of business in New Jersey. Cohn Resnick, Accounting, Tax, and Advisory, where forward thinking creates results. And by Verizon. Promotional support provided by NJ.com. Small news, big news, true Jersey. And by NJBIZ. All business, all New Jersey.
Welcome to CAUCUS New Jersey. I'm Steve Adubato. You know, businesswomen from New Jersey are going well beyond the Garden State to connect and grow with other businesswomen in India. That's right, India. Here to discuss, we have Daryl Harrison Rand, founder of Friends of India. Dr. Nancy Blattner, been with us many times, the president of Caldwell University, and also back with us again, Linda Bowden, New Jersey regional president of PNC Bank. I want to thank all of you for joining us to talk about this topic. Actually, I think you started talking to us about this in a conversation we were having on campus, and then I knew that Linda was involved. But you're the one who really started this whole thing. Friends of India, describe it for those who don't know. What is it?
It's a consortium of businesswomen, now numbering 120. And it was a series of interactions through the International Advertising Association, through the New Jersey Ad Club, through other connective fiber, and a series of developments in my own personal life that said, I'd like to try this experiment of taking all of the exposure I've had and putting it into a framework for women, because women tended not to get outside their state, outside their boundaries, because corporate America and agencies and companies, media companies don't tend to give that license to senior business
So Friends of
women.
India has been going on for several years.
11 years.
11 years. So you got, first trip was?
First trip was, for me, last fall, late October to early November.
And your first trip?
Same.
Same trip.
Same trip.
These trips have been going on for a while. Top leaders, women leaders in the state going to India, having these incredible 9-day experiences. Why don't we do this? Why don't we take a look at the trip that was taken in late October into November of 2015 of this trip, Friends of India, and we'll come back and we'll have a conversation. Let's take a look at the clip.
Friends of India took root in America more than 10 years ago. It started as a dream for Daryl Rand and Poonam Khubani.
Saying, let's go.
They had a bold vision to create a network of American career women, to travel as a delegation and connect with their Indian colleagues.
Yes, it feels very much like a friendship.
Bankers, entrepreneurs, educators, doctors, lawyers, and communicators. It didn't matter if it was New Jersey or New Delhi. What linked professional women across 2 continents had been largely untapped. A passion to share knowledge, ideas, and best practices with other women, all guided by a sisterly spirit of mentorship.
Powerful stuff. I want to make it clear that Anoli Patel, who is a partner and creative director at Real Films, part of the team that produced that. The biggest thing you took away from this experience?
The knowledge that I learned about India. I didn't know so much about India, and to have an experience of India that wasn't typical of a tourist experience was what overwhelmed me. The fact that there are 400 million Indian people who are 25 years old or younger, and to think about...
Do that again?
400 million Indian citizens who are 25 years old or younger, more than the population of the United States, how that's going to impact the world. and how it's going to impact education. And so being the president of a university, that was a very powerful number for me, and it made me think in ways that I hadn't thought before about education for our own students, but also education for students who are in India that might have an interest in coming to the United States.
We're going to come back and talk about the fact that there's real follow-up going on there. Business side, economic opportunities.
Listen, I'll tell you, I went very excited. Daryl, for years, had been trying to get me to go, so I finally was able to go. And I'm very proud to say I actually introduced Nancy to the whole idea here at your studio, by the way, Steve.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it was.
Really
well, here I met Nancy. I introduced her to later. But
it's interesting how people.
Yeah, so thank you for being the connector there. But I went there expecting to have a terrific time. Not unlike Nancy, I didn't expect to learn so much. And it was, from my perspective, yes, it is a very young country. Unlike China, which has an aging population, it's a very dynamic country. It's a very warm country, a very colorful country. And these people are determined to make India into an economic powerhouse. So from the perspective of business in New Jersey, and certainly we have a very dynamic Indian population in this state, this offers tremendous opportunity for business, jobs, bringing people over, subsidiaries of existing businesses, and they have a very big interest in the United States.
And follow up on this, because we were actually talking to Michelle Brown, who heads up Choose New Jersey, which is an organization dedicated to promoting business in the state. You're very connected to them as well. Make it clear what this could mean.
I'm on the board of Choose New Jersey, and from our perspective, we feel as if this has a chance to expand into interest relative to bringing businesses here to the state, interest in terms of either starting or bringing subsidiaries here to the state, enormous opportunity.
We'll go back on the educational side in a moment, but Daryl, I'm curious. I mean, there are so many places you could have started this, Friends of, wherever. Just the short version, the Reader's Digest version. Why India?
You once asked me this question, and I answered. I said, it was my kismet.
I remember you said that, but I just want to understand that again.
And to that point, I was thinking about that as I was coming here today. It was a time in my life that a series of circumstances and opportunities kind of were on the horizon. And the question was, I was really testing myself and growing myself. Could I take all the experience I had had in the marketing communications business, the organizational exposure I had, could I marry this together? And then the kismet was, I decided to do a major event at the Hotel Pierre for the International Advertising Association, and India was the theme. And it was amazing the number of people who came to me and said, we will help you authenticate it. And in the process, I became exposed to this very rich culture and had many different portals to enter it. And I became mesmerized as each of them on the first time. And then in growing the opportunity, it just got richer and richer. I learned more, and I learned how to blend and represent the sectors of business, and it was a women's thing. It became very clear it was a women's.
To Daryl's point, I remember when I first heard that Daryl was doing this, and then more and more of the friends that we've had history with, and we've worked with PNC, and we've had history at Caldwell as well. I have to tell you, but I want to ask it publicly, I thought it privately. Why not guys? Is it a woman's thing? And by the way, a loaded question. Is there something, I'll come back to Daryl in a second, but I'm curious about this. Do you think that there's something about a group of women leaders in business and academia and all sorts of sectors coming together that is somewhat of a unique experience for 9 days, loaded question, I know, that would be different if if guys were there?
Well, I could answer that in two ways. One, I think something I never expected was the incredible bonding that these women have had. And Anoli, who's not able to be with us today, talks about the sisterhood of the women who went on the trip. And I think there's no other way to describe it.
A sisterhood?
Yes. we have found many ways to be together, and it's never the full group. It's always some subset, even if it's a large subset, since the time we've come back. And it's been everything from doing official things where we were with Linda when she was recognized by the Northern New Jersey Girl Scout Council,
Right.
to coming to my campus to watch a Bollywood film and have an Indian dinner, to going to other more formal functions that Daryl has invited us to and has created for us. So there's been that.
Supporting each other?
Yes, I think so, in a variety of ways. But in addition to that, I think that there's a real connection with the women of India, because the women of India, both those we met and many that we heard about, are really pivotal in their villages, where they are the linchpins for ensuring that their children will get an education, for being entrepreneurial, to do crafts and things that allow them to work from their homes, but allow them to have some kind of an income that allows not only their family, but their villages to have a better substance of living. So it was very powerful for me as a woman to see that and to be part of that exchange. And of course, the people that we met with, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as well, many of them were very highly placed women in India, and they shared their experiences with us, what had happened with them in their climb into the positions that they had, and were very candid about the experiences that they had.
That's powerful.
Very powerful.
And the other piece, Linda, which is fascinating to me, is this accurate that each one of you who have gone adopts a young woman in India to support and help that young woman do what? Help us understand that.
Yeah, I think we all felt that this trip was not an end in itself. We had to find a way to continue not only fostering our interest and love of India, but our desire to help in some small way.
To make a difference.
To make a difference, exactly.
As our friend Russ and Angelica
that's
Berry,
right. That's exactly
the very
right.
foundation making a difference.
That's
Awards,
exactly right. And so from our perspective, this was a great way to make a difference, and something we could do easily. It doesn't interfere with our day jobs, but yet it's something we can really get behind.
And so what exactly was done? What does it mean to adopt a young woman to do what?
To help from an economic perspective, to ensure that the basics are there for that woman, to ensure that, they say that helping really is one person at a time. And so this is what we're trying to do.
And Daryl, real quick before we go to a break, no guys. Did you ever try guys?
We did.
And?
Didn't work.
Come on!
Just didn't
Maybe
work.
you, Steve. Maybe you'll
Not
be
the right guys. No,
exception.
seriously, you're convinced that it is for women women leaders. You're convinced.
We did one trip, one mission was with the Chamber of Commerce, the Hudson County Chamber of Commerce, Jersey City Economic Development, and we had a split group of men and women. And what seemed to happen was that the guys would cluster together. See, the women are just this sisterhood bonding concept. It is just so prevalent and it's so dominant.
Really?
But men tended to go off, they'll have a drink at the bar, the women weren't necessarily invited, and they clustered together. And that's not good for the dynamic of the growth and the interfacing and building this esprit de corps, which is so fundamental.
You know this and you know this. You don't know this, that I am obsessed by the question of leadership, and I'm constantly asking about your greatest leadership challenge and your greatest leadership lesson. You know I'm going to ask the question about how men and women potentially lead differently and whether this has taught you anything different, because the way you congregate is different, the way you support each other is different, and no more men on this trip. I promise we'll continue talking about Friends of India and how women have something that we just don't understand when they're together. Right back right after this.
To see more Caucus New Jersey with Steve Adubato programs, visit us online at steveadubato.org. If you would like to express an opinion, email us at info@caucusnj.org. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Steve Adubato PhD. And follow us on Twitter at Steve Adubato.
Steve Adubato, more importantly, talking about an organization called Friends of India. By the way, do we have the website for Friends of India? Can we put it up? I want to talk about the issue of poverty in India, which is actually hard to comprehend. You can see the numbers or hear the numbers, but that's not the same as being there. Go.
Well, I think many of us have seen Slumdog Millionaire some years ago, and we saw the slum that was based upon. It was right there. We saw families with very small children, infants living on street curbs. But I think the two examples that just, and I say this not lightly, seared in my soul, I'll never forget this, is we were driving in the bus and we were looking out the bus and there was a trestle of an overpass that we were going under. And there was a young boy, 6 or 7 years old, sleeping on one of those support beams. And you could tell that he lived there. His belongings were there. And to think about the fact that that was home to a young boy that if he had been in New Jersey or in the United States, he would have been in school. And clearly that was not available for him or part of his life was very jarring to me. And then my last day there, I was with one of the other ladies. Were making a last-minute shopping expedition to the mall. And we were stopped in a lot of traffic, and a young girl came up, beautifully dressed, maybe 9 years old, and she was doing acrobatics outside the car. And of course, she was begging, and so both of us rolled down the window and we gave her some money. And not that I wanted to be thanked or acknowledged in any way, that was not the point. But when she looked at me and took the money, you hear about old souls. There was just a lack of affect there that I'd never seen in a child that age. There was just a deadness about her eyes that was so incredibly sad.
She was 9?
I'd say about 9. I mean, it's hard to say, but you know, having grandchildren and having had children, and so she was a young girl. And to know that that was her life. So when you asked Linda earlier about our sponsorship of these children, I think part of what we're looking to do is sponsor these young girls so that they will have an opportunity for an education, and that their future and their dream can be something different than what I think this girl had no dream. What I saw was no hope.
Would you have had to see what you saw in order to have felt what you felt, as opposed to reading about it, hearing about it?
You know, I've read a lot, and I have feelings that are similar, but I don't think to the depth, no. Seeing it firsthand changed me, truly. It changed my life.
And Steve, one thing I'd like to add is the folks with whom we met. So we met with bank presidents, we met with heads of different companies. These are people who are well aware of the challenges that face their country.
So they know about
absolutely,
these children.
absolutely,
Sure.
And they feel strongly that an economic process is the way out to truly engage in economic development. And what we were told repeatedly was the challenge is even greater in the rural areas. Mm-hmm. We were mainly concentrating on urban areas. But
meaning worse in rural areas than what you saw?
Yes, and worse in terms of also getting to them. So it's access, it's ensuring that they're able to make a difference in the rural areas. And so, yeah, the poverty was disturbing, but at the same time, there's a concurrent wish among the people, at least the ones we met, to ensure that something's done about it. So I'm hoping the next time I personally go back, we'll start to see a difference.
There's a follow-up. You said there's a conference.
There's a conference, the Women's Economic Forum, the largest in the world, 1,500 women are convening next Monday morning in Delhi. Representing 93 countries, and I'm proud to say that I leave tomorrow with Anoli Patel and Dr. Sue Henderson from NJCU, president.
New Jersey City University.
Yes.
And the goal is?
The goal is, I'm actually going as a student, just as they described their experience, that I want to go and hear the conversation. I had an inkling that this was an important forum that we have created. Now I'd like to see how we fit into the greater whole and what we can learn from this, that we can grow our organization to be meaningful. Our website will have a registration opportunity there. What we want to do is breed the conversation. Anyone who wants to talk about women's empowerment or gender equality or wants to become part of the conversation between Indian businesswomen and U.S.-based businesswomen are welcome. There's no fee, there's nothing. It's just part of the conversation.
Two follow-ups here. By the way, we've been putting up the website for Friends of India, right? So people will find out more. Do the academic piece. There's potential to do something academically?
I think it works two ways. One, I think that there are students in the United States, clearly perhaps in business, that could really benefit from doing internships, even if they're short-term in India, and working through some of the contacts that we made to do internships in some of the villages that Linda and Daryl were just speaking about, to really understand where many of the people who are not in some of the financial centers of India, like Mumbai or Delhi, where they're living and what can make a difference to them entrepreneurially. So I think that would be incredible for American students, because India is definitely a rising player in the global economy, in the global market, just in the world in general.
In spite of all the poverty.
Yes, yes, I absolutely believe that. I think their gross domestic product will grow, and I think that we will see a tremendous change still in our lifetimes. But I also think that there's an opportunity for students in India to come to the United States to study as well. And one of the things that I heard was that students are diligent, they are intelligent, they speak English, but they really need an opportunity to acclimate to what American culture and society is like within the context of higher education in the United States. So providing some kind of a short immersion experience for these students where they really understand, you know, how to interact with a faculty member on an American campus, how to speak in front of a group or work as part of a team. Sometimes these are things that they haven't encountered in their schools in India.
Quick question, a few moments we have left. For a lot of people watching who may be curious about what we're talking about, could you understand some folks saying, well, that's fascinating, but what is it that I can do, should do, when I'm struggling to try to figure out my own situation, take care of my own kids? What do you want from me? Is this something for just, I'm not going to say an elite, but well, it is an elite, a talented, established group of women leaders? Someone watching. What does it mean to them?
I think becoming a global citizen.
What does that mean?
And becoming a global citizen is being sensitized to other culture and other tradition other than what is native to yourself.
Do you sense, I'm not going to get into a philosophical, political discussion, but a sense of xenophobia to some extent that causes people to be more insular? Like, look, what are you kidding me? Just trying to take care of our own, just playing devil's advocate.
Absolutely.
And that the other is problematic. The other is part of the problem. And you're asking me to think about them?
When you're in survival mode or your resources are limited, I don't think you can get out of your own sphere.
Well, what do you say to those people right now?
However, there is a world out there that you need to become attuned to, and I think this is a big educational problem here because we've tended to be insular and we have not looked at India and China. But to be a global citizen in the 21st century, it's not just going to be Western Europe or what we're familiar with as Americans.
And Linda, to follow up, does that mean we also, quote, miss big opportunities?
Oh, there's no question. From a business perspective,
yes.
Absolutely. You know, I heard a phrase yesterday, each one of us is the CEO of our own learning. And so I think you ask a great question, and my answer would simply be to get out there and learn. And yes, I understand people are focused on their own issues, and there are a lot of challenges, but I think they do themselves a disservice to not understand the broader perspective in life, and especially if those folks are considering a career in business, because we are gone are the days when business is just a domestic enterprise. We are absolutely both challenged and enhanced by global economic forces, and India could not be a better example of that. And I would also tell you, we haven't talked about the new leader, Modi, in India, and people there feel that this is
the new political leader.
New political leader, and people there feel, as do many of us here, that he is someone who has a very strong interest in business. He's someone who recognizes that jobs and economic development is an important part of the solution.
This is practical as well.
Yes.
A minute and a half left. Do you believe that there's a significant difference in the way men and women lead?
I absolutely do.
Go ahead.
You know, I've
30 seconds or less.
Told you this before. When I had an opportunity for a national fellowship, I chose to study, of everyone that I could have chosen, a female president, because I believed then, and I saw evidence of, women lead differently than men. There's overlap, but there are definite differences.
Better?
Different. Not better, just different.
Just definitely different.
Definitely different.
Yeah.
Daryl?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think women tend to assess a situation from more perspectives than men tend to. I find men very transactional. They see
Let's
an
get it done.
opportunity and let's do it.
Now. My staff was just saying to me, why do you have to get it done now? Why can't we look at we don't need to look. Let's get it done now. And then all of a sudden I realized the women on our staff brought up 3 different things I hadn't thought of. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yes.
And
Okay.
that's what I'm talking about.
Thank God
Women
for
will
the women
tend
around
to
here.
look at the tangents that
Yes.
are feeding into it, and they won't be comfortable making decisions until they can understand the dynamics
How
of what's
dare
going.
they do that? Linda, give me a few seconds.
Listen,
Different?
I have different, but I have to tell you, I've worked for wonderful male leaders. I've worked for wonderful female leaders. I would also say women are very decisive as well. But I think to the points that were made by Daryl and Nancy, there's a very strong collaborative element there. And I also don't think that there's a competitive. Certainly, we're competitive, but it's not trying to determine who's better. It's much more around how can we get the job done.
Well, you're three terrific women leaders who are making a difference, and the information about India was so powerful.
The preceding program has been a production of the CAUCUS Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence, and 13 for WNET, NJTV, and WHYY. Funding for this edition of CAUCUS New Jersey has been provided by Suez, Sovereign Health System, MagnaCare, New Jersey Sharing Network, the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce, Cone Resnick, and by Verizon. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area. CAUCUS New Jersey has been produced in partnership with TriStar Studios.
Hi, I'm Peter Rooney. In 2006, I lost my father to renal disease. He was on the waiting list for a new kidney, but did not receive one in time. Unfortunately, so many like my father have lost their lives while waiting for a life-saving organ. At New Jersey Sharing Network, we're committed to saving and enhancing people's lives through organ and tissue donation and by informing people about this important decision. Because you can make a difference and save a life.